The rain had been falling for 3 days straight across southern Louisiana. Jim Callahan, a 58-year-old veteran trucker with salt and pepper hair and weathered hands, stood on the edge of Highway 90, watching helplessly as muddy waters swallowed everything he had worked for over the past 30 years. "Get back, Jim! The water's still rising!" shouted Mike from the emergency response team, his voice barely audible over the howling wind and the distant rumble of thunder. But Jim couldn't move. His eyes remained fixed on his 2015 Peterbilt 389, the midnight blue rig with custom chrome detailing that was now half submerged in the churning floodwater. That truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was his livelihood, his freedom, and the last connection to his late father, who had taught him everything about life on the road. "It's got the old man's compass mounted on the dash," Jim whispered to himself, the rain streaking down his face, mixing with tears he wouldn't acknowledge. His leather logbook is in the sleeper. The waters had risen faster than anyone had predicted. Jim had been at the Bayou Vista truck stop when the evacuation orders came through. He'd managed to grab his wallet and phone, but there hadn't been time for anything else. The family heirlooms, irreplaceable mementos of 3 generations of Callahan truckers, were being claimed by the flood alongside the truck itself. As darkness fell and emergency lights cast eerie red and blue glows across the water-choked landscape, Jim finally allowed Mike to lead him to higher ground. His shoulders slumped in a way they never had before. Not even when he'd lost his wife Marie to cancer 7 years ago. Back then, the open road had been his salvation. Now, that too was gone. "I called Danny," Mike said, referring to Jim's 29-year-old son. "He's driving down from Baton Rouge. Should be here in about an hour." Jim merely nodded, his usual booming voice reduced to nothing. 3 decades of independent trucking, of dawn-to-dusk hauls across 48 states, of building a reputation for never missing a deadline. All of it seemed to be disappearing beneath the murky waters along with his Peterbilt. When Danny arrived, his father looked like a stranger, smaller somehow, diminished. The son, who had grown up hearing the rumble of his father's diesel engine coming home after weeks away, now watched as Jim climbed silently into the passenger seat of his Honda Civic. "The insurance won't cover even half of what that truck was worth," Jim finally said, as they drove away from the flood zone, "and nothing can replace what was inside it." Danny gripped the steering wheel tighter. His relationship with his father had always been complicated, full of long absences, brief homecoming, and the omnipresent sense that Jim loved the road more than anything or anyone. But seeing his father like this, broken in a way that went beyond financial loss, made something shift inside him. "We'll figure it out, Dad," Danny said, though he had no idea how. "We always did." As they drove into the night, neither of them could have imagined how those words would prove true, or how the coming months would test and transform them both. The small apartment above Mrs. Guidry's garage in Houma, Louisiana, wasn't meant for 2 grown men. It was where Danny had lived alone for the past 3 years, while building his small business designing websites for local companies. Now, with Jim occupying the pull-out couch in the living room, the space felt impossibly cramped. "You're burning the roo," Jim commented from his spot at the kitchen table, where he sat studying the newspaper classifieds, looking for driving jobs that didn't require owning your own rig. Danny bit back a sharp reply, stirring the flour and oil mixture more vigorous. 3 months of this new arrangement had worn his patience thin. His father's criticisms, his restlessness, his brooding silence. It was like living with a storm cloud that occasionally spoke. "I got a call from United Transport today," Jim said, folding the paper with careful precision. "They're offering me a company truck, benefits, and everything." Danny looked up from the stove. "That's good news, isn't it?" Jim shrugged. "It's an international, plastic dashboard, automatic transmission." The disgust in his voice was palpable. "And I'd be on their schedule, their routes. No say in anything. But it's work," Danny pointed out. "It's driving. It's not the same." Jim stood up and moved to the window, staring out at the small parking lot below. "You wouldn't understand." There it was again, the invisible wall that had stood between them for as long as Danny could remember. "You wouldn't understand. You don't know what it's like. You've never felt the pull of the open road." Danny turned off the stove. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. "I understand that when Mom was sick, I was the one sitting by her bed. I understand what it's like to watch someone lose everything that matters to them." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken resentments and missed connection. Finally, Jim turned from the window. "Your mother understood why I had to keep driving. We needed the money for her treatments. She needed you there," Danny countered, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "I needed you there, but you were always running away to your precious truck." Jim's face hardened. "That precious truck put food on our table and paid for the roof over your head. It paid for your college, too, before you dropped out. I dropped out to take care of Mom." Danny slammed his hand on the counter. "Someone had to." The argument might have escalated further. Jim's phone rang, an old flip phone that had somehow survived the flood. He answered it gruffly, his eyes still locked with his son. "Hello? Yes? This is Jim Callahan." Danny turned back to the stove, trying to salvage the roof their dinner. Behind him, his father's tone shifted from irritation to confusion. "My what? No, that must be some mistake. My truck was totaled in the flood. No, I haven't been to any dealership." Danny froze, listening now. "Well, of course I'm interested, but I don't understand what you're saying," Jim continued. "Who's Shane Lowry, the golfer?" There was a long pause as Jim listened, his expression transforming from skepticism to disbelief. "We'll be there first thing tomorrow," he finally said, hanging up the phone with hands that trembled slightly. "What was that about?" Danny asked. Jim looked at his son with the first spark of life Danny had seen in months. "Apparently, someone wants to talk to me about a truck at a Premier Motors dealership in Baton Rouge. Something about Shane Lowry? And a surprise." He shook his head. "Probably some kind of scam or mix-up." Danny's mind raced. 3 weeks earlier, on a whim born of desperation to see his father return to something resembling his old self, he'd sent an email, an impulsive, probably foolish message, Shane Lowry's public contact address. The Irish golfer was known for charity work after surviving a serious car accident years ago. Danny had never expected a response. "Maybe we should check it out," Danny suggested, trying to keep his voice casual. "I don't have any client meetings tomorrow." Jim hesitated, then nodded. "Might as well. Not like I have anything better to do." As they resumed preparing dinner in a silence less tense than before, Danny felt a flicker of hope. He had no idea if his message had actually reached Shane Lowry, or if this mysterious call was even related. But for the first time in months, his father had something to look forward to, even if it was only to confirm a misunderstanding. The morning dawned clear and cool, a crisp November day that felt clean after months of humid Gulf Coast heat. Jim was already awake and dressed when Danny emerged from his bedroom at 6:30 a.m. He found his father standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trimming his beard, something he hadn't bothered to do since the flood. "You look more like yourself," Danny commented, pouring coffee into 2 travel mugs. Jim grunted in response, but there was less heaviness in the sound than usual. He was wearing his good flannel shirt, the red and black one that had hung untouched in Danny's closet for months, and his worn but polished cowboy boot. The drive to Baton Rouge would take just over an hour. They set out as the sun was still burning the morning mist off the bayou, Jim insisting on driving Danny's Honda, despite his usual disdain for tiny cars that float like corks on the highway. "So who exactly called you yesterday?" Danny asked after they'd merged onto the interstate, the question he'd been holding back since the previous evening. Jim kept his eyes on the road. "Woman named Teresa Daniel. Said she's the sales manager at Premier Motors. Told me they had something important to discuss regarding a Peterbilt, and mentioned Shane Lowry. Didn't make much sense." Danny nodded, trying to appear casual. "Weird that she mentioned Lowry specifically." "That's what I thought," Jim agreed. "What would an Irish golfer have to do with a truck dealership in Louisiana?" The question hung in the air between them. Danny stared out the window, watching the landscape change from wetlands to pine forest as they headed north. He thought about the email he'd sent, a desperate 2 a.m. composition after watching his father stare blankly at old photographs of himself standing proudly beside his truck. "Dad," Danny began carefully, "what would you do if you could get back on the road? I mean, if you had your own rig again?" Jim's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Doesn't matter much now, does it? Insurance paid out $62,000. Good trucks start at $150,000 these days, and that's for a basic model, nothing custom." He shook his head. "No bank's going to finance a man my age starting over. But if you could," Danny pressed. "If money wasn't the issue." A soft smile, the first Danny had seen in months, touched the corners of Jim's mouth. I'd head west, take on some long hauls through New Mexico, Arizona. Those desert sunsets from behind a wheel, nothing like it in the world. His voice took on a warmth that had been absent for too long. I'd stop at Bill's place in Flagstaff. They still make coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Danny listened, really listened, as his father spoke about route and roadside diners, about mountain passes that tested a driver's skill, and truck stops where the same waitresses had been pouring coffee for 3 decades. For the first time, he began to understand that his father's love of trucking wasn't just about escape. It was about connection to a way of life, to an America that still existed in pockets along the interstate system. We used to haul Christmas trees together, your grandfather and I, Jim said, as they passed the sign welcoming them to Baton Rouge, from Oregon all the way to Florida. 23 years old, and I thought I knew everything about driving until we hit ice in the Rockies. He chuckled. Old man took the wheel and saved our lives, then made me drive the next 12 hours so I'd learn not to fear the road. You never told me that story before, Danny said quietly. Jim nodded. Lots of stories I never told. They fell silent as Danny directed them through the city traffic toward Premier Motors on the outskirts of town. The dealership was larger than they'd expected, specializing in high-end trucks with a row of gleaming Peterbilts, Kenworths, and Western Stars displayed prominently at the front. As Jim parked the Honda between 2 massive pickup trucks, Danny noticed his father's hands were trembling slightly. Probably just a misunderstanding, Jim muttered, but there was a hint of something like hope in his voice. Only one way to find out, Danny replied, reaching for the door handle. As they walked toward the showroom, a tall woman in a crisp blazer emerged to greet them. Mr. Callahan? She asked, extending her hand. I'm Teresa Daniel. We spoke on the phone. Thank you so much for coming in today. Ma'am, Jim nodded, shaking her hand. This is my son, Danny. Teresa smiled at Danny with a look of recognition that made his heart race. Yes, we've been corresponding. It's wonderful to meet you both in person. She gestured toward the building. If you'll follow me, there's someone inside who's been waiting to meet you. Jim shot a questioning glance at his son, but Danny merely shrugged, his pulse quickening as they followed Teresa through the doors and into the bright, polished showroom. The showroom of Premier Motors smelled of leather, polish, and new rubber, scents that brought an immediate physical reaction from Jim. Danny watched his father's posture straighten, saw his nostrils flare slightly as they entered the space filled with gleaming truck and promotional banner. Teresa led them past the main display area toward a glass-walled office at the back. Through the transparent wall, Danny could see a man in a navy blue golf shirt standing with his back to them, talking on a phone. Even from behind, there was something familiar about him. Mr. Lowry, they're here, Teresa announced as she opened the door. The man turned, ending his call, and Danny felt a jolt of recognition. Shane Lowry, the actual Shane Lowry, stood before them, his familiar beard and friendly eyes exactly as they appeared in countless golf broadcasts and charity promotions. Jim Callahan, Lowry said in his distinctive Irish accent, stepping forward with an extended hand. I've heard a lot about you, sir. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Jim, clearly stunned, shook Lowry's hand automatically. Thank you, though I'm not sure why. Dad, Danny interrupted gently. Maybe we should sit down. Teresa gestured to the leather chairs arranged around a small conference table. Once they were seated, an awkward silence fell over the room until Lowry broke it with a warm chuckle. I imagine you're wondering what a golfer from Ireland is doing in a truck dealership in Louisiana. Talking to you, he said. Jim nodded, finding his voice. The thought had crossed my mind. Lowry smiled, then turned his attention to Danny. Your son wrote me quite a letter about 3 months ago. Told me about your situation, about the flood, about what trucking means to your family. Jim's head swiveled toward Danny, surprise evident on his face. I didn't think anything would come of it, Danny admitted, his cheeks flushing. I had to try something. Lowry leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Mr. Callahan, 6 years ago, I was in a serious car accident in America. Rolled my SUV outside Memphis. First person on the scene was a trucker who knew exactly what to do. Stabilized my neck, kept me calm, radioed for help with precise coordinates. He paused. The doctors told me later that his actions likely prevented permanent spinal damage. Jim listened, puzzled by the story's relevance. That trucker didn't stick around for thanks, Lowry continued. Didn't leave his name. Just did what needed doing and got back on the road. But I never forgot him or the debt I owed to someone in your profession. Teresa placed a folder on the table. When Danny's email reached Mr. Lowry's foundation, it resonated with him. He contacted us about setting up something special. Jim looked between them, confusion evident on his weathered face. I still don't understand what this has to do with me. I wasn't anywhere near Memphis 6 years ago. No, Lowry agreed, you weren't, but you represent the same spirit, the same brotherhood of the road. When I heard about what happened to you, a career driver who lost everything trying to help others evacuate, it felt like the universe giving me a chance to pay forward the debt I owed. Teresa opened the folder, revealing paperwork with Premier Motors letterhead. Mr. Callahan, we'd like to show you something, if you're up for a short walk. Jim nodded mutely, rising from his chair with a look of bewilderment. Danny followed, his heart hammering in his chest. This was going far beyond anything he'd dared to hope for when he'd sent that late-night email. They followed Teresa and Lowry through a side door that led to the dealership's massive lot. Row upon row of commercial trucks stretched before them, but Teresa led them purposefully toward a specific section at the back, where a single vehicle stood apart from the others. As they rounded the corner of the building, Jim stopped dead in his tracks. There, gleaming in the morning sun, stood a midnight blue Peterbilt 389, almost identical to the one Jim had lost, but newer, its chrome work catching the light like liquid silver. But it wasn't just any Peterbilt. Even from a distance, Danny could see the custom details, the specific stripe pattern his father had always favored, the extra clearance lights along the top of the cab, the personalized mud flap. Jim stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief. Go ahead, Lowry encouraged softly. Take a closer look. Like a man in a trance, Jim approached the truck. His hand, when he raised it to touch the driver's door, was trembling visibly. Danny followed a few steps behind, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. It's not exactly the same as your old one, Teresa explained. This is the 2023 model, but we did our best to match the specifications from the photos Danny sent us. Jim slowly circled the truck, his fingertips trailing along its gleaming surface. When he reached the passenger side, he stopped abruptly and bent to look at something mounted just below the door. A small brass plate was affixed there, engraved with words that made Jim's breath catch. The Callahan Legacy, 3 generations on the American road. Open it up, Lowry suggested, hanging back with Teresa as father and son approached the driver's side door. Jim climbed up with the practiced ease of a man who had performed this same action thousands of times before. Danny followed, squeezing into the spacious cab beside his father. The interior smelled of new leather and polished wood. The dashboard was a masterpiece of traditional styling, combined with modern technology. But what caught Jim's attention, what made his hand fly to his mouth to stifle a sound, was half laugh, half sob, was what sat mounted the center of the dash, his father's compass, and beside it, protected in a custom-built clear case, the leather-bound logbook that had been passed down through generations of Callahan truckers. How? Jim whispered, turning to his son. They were in the truck. They were lost. Danny smiled, tears welling in his eyes. Not lost, just underwater. I hired a recovery diver the week after the flood. He found the truck, got into the cab. Most things were ruined, but these, he gestured to the compass and logbook. These were salvageable. I've been hiding them in my closet, waiting for the right moment. Outside the truck, Shane Lowry and Teresa Daniels waited patiently, giving the Callahans their moment. Inside the cab, Jim ran his hands over the leather steering wheel, the modern instrument panel, the sleeper compartment, equipped with every comfort a long-haul trucker could desire. Danny, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. What exactly is happening here? Before Danny could answer, there was a tap on the window. Jim rolled it down to find Shane Lowry offering him a set of keys. Your son told us what trucking means to you, Mr. Callahan, Lowry said, about your father and his father before him, about what was really lost in that flood. He held the keys out. My foundation would be honored if you'd accept this truck, free and clear. No strings attached. Jim stared at the key, then at Lowry, disbelief written across his features. But this rig must cost "Don't worry about that," Lowry interrupted with a wave of his hand. "Consider it my contribution to keeping a good man on the road where he belongs. The paperwork's ready whenever you are." Jim's hand closed around the key, his calloused fingers gripping them like a lifeline. He looked at his son, and in that moment, the walls between them seemed to thin. "You did this," Jim said softly. "You made this happen." Danny shrugged, embarrassed but proud. "I just wrote an email. Mr. Lowry did the rest." Jim shook his head, a tear finally escaping to roll down his weathered cheek. "You understood. All this time, I thought you didn't, but you did." As Teresa discreetly guided Shane Lowry back toward the office to give them privacy, father and son sat together in the cab of the new Peterbilt, surrounded by the legacy of their family and the promise of roads yet to be traveled. The sun was setting over western Louisiana, painting the sky in bands of orange and purple as the midnight blue Peterbilt cruised steadily along Interstate 10. Jim sat comfortably in the driver's, his hands resting lightly on the wheel as if they had never left it. Beside him, Danny watched the landscape roll by, the fields and forests transitioning to the industrial outskirts of Lake Charles. It had been 2 weeks since that surreal morning at Premier Motors, 2 weeks of paperwork and preparation, of incredulous gratitude and quiet adjustments to a future that had suddenly expanded beyond the confines of Mrs. Guidry's garage apartment. "Should be able to make Beaumont by nightfall," Jim commented, checking his mirrors with the practiced precision of a veteran driver. "Not bad for our first day out." Our first day. The words hung in the cab, significant and unexpected. When Jim had asked Danny to join him for this initial haul, a straightforward run to Dallas with a load of industrial equipment, Danny had assumed it was a one-off invitation, a thank-you gesture for his role in bringing Shane Lowry into their lives. But over the past few days, as they'd prepared for the journey, something had shifted between them. Conversations that once would have devolved into arguments instead opened into stories. Jim sharing memories of his early days on the road, Danny talking about his struggles to build his web design business in a small town where many businesses still operated without so much as a Facebook. "You know," Jim said now, as they passed a sign welcoming them to Texas, "your grandfather always said a trucking rig needs a good computer man these days. All these electronic logging devices, GPS system, online load board." He glanced sidelong at his son. "Man could build a solid business, handling both the driving and the digital side of it." Danny felt a smile tugging at his lips. "Are you offering me a job, Dad?" Jim chuckled, the sound warm and genuine in a way Danny couldn't remember hearing since before his mother got sick. "More like a partnership, if you're interested. Callahan and Son Trucking has a nice ring to it." The proposal hung in the air between them. Not just an offer of employment, but an invitation to bridge the gap that had separated them for so long. "I'd have to bring my equipment," Danny said slowly. "Set up a mobile office in the sleeper when we're stopped." "Plenty of room back there," Jim nodded. "And plenty of clients who'd appreciate having someone who speaks both trucker and tech." They fell into comfortable silence as the miles rolled beneath them. The new Peterbilt hummed with quiet power, its engine note a pleasant background to their thoughts. "I called Shane Lowry yesterday," Danny finally said, "to thank him again." He hesitated. "He told me something he hadn't mentioned at the dealership." Jim raised an eyebrow, waiting. "The trucker who helped him after his accident? The one who never gave his name?" Danny continued. "Lowry said the man was driving a midnight blue Peterbilt with Louisiana plate." Jim's eyes widened slightly before returning to the road ahead. "Lot of blue Peterbilts in Louisiana." With a St. Christopher medal hanging from the mirror and a bumper sticker that said, "I'd rather be fishing in Henderson Swamp," Danny countered, watching his father's expression closely. Jim's hands shifted slightly on the wheel, but his voice remained casual. "Don't recall ever having a bumper sticker like that." "Dad," Jim sighed, then nodded once. "Memphis, 2017. Hauling industrial freezers to Nashville. Came around a bend and saw a car flipped in the median. Didn't know it was anyone famous. Just a fella in a bad spot." He shrugged, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter as the memory returned. "His SUV was smoking, fuel leaking. I grabbed my first aid kit and fire extinguisher from behind the seat. Poor fella was hanging upside down, still strapped in, blood on his forehead but conscious. Just did what needed doing. Stabilized his neck with my jacket rolled up, talked to him about golf to keep him alert till the ambulance arrived. Nothing special. Then drove away without leaving your name," Danny finished, watching his father's profile against the orange-streaked sky. "Because that's what a Callahan does." Jim glanced at his son, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of his eyes. Your grandfather pulled over for every stranded vehicle from Mississippi to California. Never took so much as a thank you. Used to tell me, Jimmy, a job done right is its own reward. Man lived by that code till the day he died. He tapped the compass on the dash with a weathered finger. That's what this old thing really points to. Danny nodded, understanding finally settling over him like a comfortable blanket. All those years he'd resented his father's absence, his dedication to the road. He'd been missing the bigger picture. The Christmas morning, with gifts appearing from distant states. The way Jim would quietly pay for neighbors' car repairs without mentioning it. Jim Callahan wasn't running away from his family when he climbed into his truck. He was carrying on a tradition of quiet service and self-reliance that stretched back generations. So, Jim said after a while, his voice lighter as they passed a billboard advertising Big Earl's Truck Stop, best pie in Texas. Next exit. This partnership, you thinking about it? I could use someone to manage the electronic logs, find the best routes, handle the billing. Modern trucking's different now. Danny looked out at the highway stretching before them, at the trucks of every size and description sharing the road, at the America that existed in truck stop and loading dock, and small towns connected by ribbons of asphalt. A family of 4 waved from an SUV as they passed. A motorcyclist nodded in respect at the gleaming Peterbilt. For the first time, Danny saw the road through his father's eyes, not as an escape, but as a way of life with its own dignity and purpose. Yeah, he said finally, pulling his laptop from his bag. I'm thinking we could make it work. Already got some ideas for a website and tracking. As the Peterbilt's headlights came on automatically against the deepening dusk, Jim reached up and adjusted the St. Christopher medal now hanging from the new truck's mirror. Beside it dangled a modern-looking USB drive in a protective case containing Danny's business files and digital portfolio. Your computer stuff and my driving, Jim mused as they passed a sign for the Texas Welcome Center. Past and future, riding together. They crossed the state line at twilight, the Peterbilt's engine humming steadily beneath them, its jake brake occasionally rumbling like distant thunder. Behind them lay the floodwaters and loss, the months of struggling to find solid ground. Ahead stretched thousands of miles of possibility, and a father-son relationship being rebuilt 1 mile marker at a time. In the dashboard, securely mounted in its special holder, the Callahan family compass pointed west, toward new horizons, new stories, and the continuing legacy of 3 generations on the American road.